Well, from a very grey and rainy Vancouver, a very warm welcome to our listeners today. This is the second in Clear Foundation's Making Alzheimer's Clear webinar series. And today we are thrilled to have one of our funded researchers with us, Dr. Shernaz Bamji. Before I introduce Dr. Bamji, I'd just like to set the stage for our discussion today. As we speak, nearly 750,000 Canadians are living with dementia, including Alzheimer's disease. And this number, sadly, is expected to rise quite significantly. The projection is that over 1 million will be living with dementia by 2030 unless we do something, unless we intervene with mitigating treatments and earlier diagnoses. The impact of this disease on patients, their families, and our national healthcare system simply cannot be calculated. Unless something is done, we're facing a tsunami of dementia and a national healthcare and economic crisis. So we are Canadians' Leading Edge Alzheimer Research, or CLEAR Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated solely to ending Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. Our work is to fund the most promising research by the most pioneering scientists to expand our understanding of the disease, to improve treatments, and to bring hope to hundreds of thousands of Canadians living with dementia today. Through this series of webinars, our goal is to spotlight the research of our funded scientists, showing how it impacts clinical practice, meaning how does it change the advice that doctors are giving, how does it improve medications, treatments, prognoses, and ultimately quality of life for patients and families. So my name is Claire Lynch, and I am the Executive Director of CLEAR Foundation. And as I've said already today, our special guest is one of our most promising, most pioneering scientists, Dr. Shernaz Bamji. Welcome, Dr. Bamji. Thank you for being with us today. I'm sure it's a very busy day over there at the Center for Brain Health, and we're just thrilled that you've given us some of your time. Dr. Bamji is a professor of cellular and physiological sciences at the University of British Columbia. She's also the co-director of the Center for Brain Health at UBC. Dr. Bamji leads a research team that asks a simple but powerful question. How do brain cells build, maintain, and remodel the connections that allow us to learn and to remember? Keystone indicators of Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative brain diseases. Claire is very proud to have funded Dr. Bamji 3 times in her research career, and we're delighted to have her with us today. Please welcome Dr. Bamji. So to get us started, give me a minute while I figure out my technology here. It worked before this. Here we go. I wonder, Dr. Bamji, would you tell our listeners a little more about yourself and your career to date?
Thank you. It's really great to be here. As you mentioned earlier, I'm a professor at the University of British Columbia and the co-director of the Djavad Mowafaghian Center for Brain Health, which is the hub for brain research and clinical care in British Columbia. So I'm not a medical doctor and I'm not an Alzheimer's researcher, but I am a neuroscientist who's really interested in how the brain works at a cellular and molecular level. So in my lab, we ask questions like, which genetic mutations are associated with brain disease, or what are the cellular and molecular changes that occur in the brains of patients with these diseases?
Before we go on, I'd like to mention that we did ask our listeners if they had any questions they'd like to answer in today's conversation. So I'll be peppering them through our conversation. And why don't we start with one right now? So will you, for our audience, define Alzheimer's disease and the 3 most common types of dementia?
Yeah, this is actually a really great question because people often tend to use to use the words dementia and Alzheimer's disease interchangeably. But dementia is not a single disease, but actually describes a set of symptoms like memory loss, difficulty with language, etc., that can occur due to a number of different diseases. So Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. About 60 to 80% of people who have dementia have Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's is typically defined by a specific pathology in the brain. And this includes the presence of amyloid plaques and tau tangles. So, amyloid plaques are caused when a protein called A beta is produced and secreted by neurons or brain cells. And what this protein does is it disrupts the communication between neurons, causes the loss of synaptic connections, and eventually causes the neurons to die. And then the tau tangles are abnormal accumulations of another protein called tau, which builds up inside the neuron and kind of jams up the transport of nutrients within the neuron. So we used to only be able to see plaques and tangles after doing an autopsy, but nowadays we can also test for the presence of markers of these proteins in blood or plasma. So other types of dementia include vascular dementia, which is caused by reduced blood flow to the brain, usually caused from strokes. Lewy body dementia, which is due to the buildup of another protein in the brain called alpha-synuclein. And this is the dementia that people get who have Parkinson's disease. And finally, there is a mixed dementia where a patient can have a mix of pathologies like Alzheimer's disease pathologies, those plaques and tangles, as well as Lewy body pathology as well.
So it's complicated, I'm
Yes.
hearing. And we'll get to that. But before we do really dig into the science, maybe you'd set this in a historical context for us and tell us, when was our first breakthrough in our understanding of Alzheimer's disease, and how far have we come since then?
Yeah, well, to cure any illness, one has to first identify what is going wrong. And with respect to Alzheimer's disease, we really want to know what happens in the brain of a fully functioning person that leads to such a profound loss of cognition and memory. So the first breakthrough really was made by Dr. Alzheimer himself, who identified and described the pathological features of the disease, which again is the amyloid plaques and the tau tangles in the brain. And to this day, amazingly, treatments are mainly aimed at trying to get rid of these plaques and tangles, including the recently released drug called anandamab, which is an antibody against amyloid. And right now, it is being given to people with mild dementia with the hopes of slowing down the progression of the disease.
Yeah, that was really exciting news and very
Mhm.
recent, just a month ago,
Absolutely.
that this new drug
Mhm.
has been approved. And so I hope we'll hear more about that today. But along that line of questioning, Dr. Bamji, what current avenues of research are you most excited about, and what gives you the most hope for treatment and a cure?
Well, I just mentioned that to cure any illness, one has to first identify what's going wrong. And unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that we still don't really know why people are getting Alzheimer's disease. So even though we've known about these plaques and the tangles in the brain for a long, long time, the fact is, sadly, there is really not a good correlation between the plaques and the tangles and cognitive decline. So people with severe cognitive decline may have very few plaques and tangles, and people with mild cognitive problems might have lots of plaques and tangles. So the answer isn't just decreasing this in the brain. So what am I most excited about? Well, there's a lot of additional work to be done understanding the genetic risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. And there are also a lot of fascinating studies coming out on the impact of lifestyle factors like diet and exercise in the risk of Alzheimer's. And if I can just tell you one a very interesting study coming out of our center in the labs of Dr. Annie Ciernia and Dr. Carolina Trappini. Dr. Trappini and Ciernia are trying to see whether the microbiome, which is the entire community of bacteria and other organisms that live in our gut, whether the microbiome can impact the progression of Alzheimer's disease. So what they did is they took mouse models of Alzheimer's and then they replaced the gut bacteria of these mice with the gut bacteria from people with Alzheimer's disease or without Alzheimer's disease. And really interestingly, they found that the animals that got the gut bacteria from people with Alzheimer's disease did a lot worse on memory tasks compared to the mice who got the gut bacteria from people without Alzheimer's disease. And what this means is that our gut microbiome, which really is influenced by our diet, can influence the severity of the disease. Now, I think in the end, there's going to be a really complex interplay of lifestyle and genetics in the risk, of course, of developing Alzheimer's disease, as well as how severe the disease is.
That's really fascinating. I think increasingly we're understanding that lifestyle modifications can really help to support our brain health. And I hope we can have some time to delve into that a little bit in due course. But right now, because it's very exciting, can you tell us a little bit more about your current research that you're undertaking with Dr. Terence Snutch and why it's relevant and promising?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Scientists love talking about their own research. So there's a lot of strong evidence that there is an increased excitability in the brains of people with dementia, and that's Alzheimer's disease and also frontotemporal dementia, which is another kind of dementia that I didn't talk about earlier, particularly in the early stages. So people with dementia are really at a higher risk of having epileptic seizures. And we've known about this for a long time. It's been described over and over again in patients. And in animal models of dementia, we also see a hyperexcitability of the neurons, especially around those neurons that surround those amyloid plaques that I talked about earlier. Now, Dr. Snutch, who's my collaborator, is also not an Alzheimer's researcher, but he's rather a neuroscientist who is focused on the biology of ion channels. So his lab has identified a compound which they call Z944, and Z944 targets one of these ion channels and can reduce hyperexcitability. So the grant that Dr. Snutch and I have is to see whether we can use this drug to lower excitability or the hyperexcitability in Alzheimer's disease mouse models. And what is really, really exciting is that just last month, this drug passed phase 3 clinical trials to be used for essential tremor, which is something completely different. So that means that if we are indeed able to find that this drug can lower excess excitability in mouse models of Alzheimer's, it could potentially be fast-tracked for the use of for the use in Alzheimer's disease patients as well.
So how does lowering hyperactivity improve outcomes for Alzheimer patients?
Yeah, great question. So lowering hyperexcitability of neurons can protect the brain in a number of different ways. First, neuronal hyperexcitability can actually increase the formation and the secretion of A beta that is essential for the formation of those amyloid plaques that we discussed earlier. So lowering the excitability means lowering the plaque formation. And then second, hyperexcitability can also lead to the loss of synaptic connections in the brain and eventually the death of neurons. So once again, decreasing activity could be preventative and could actually protect the neurons from death. And I think you asked, it's really hard to speak to a time frame of when we can get this drug Z944 into clinical care. The drug has gone through phase 3 clinical trials, but there's still a lot of work to be done preclinically to really make sure that it would work for an Alzheimer's disease models as well.
Thanks, Dr. Bamji. You answered my next question there. So the time frame, that's fascinating because there is this delay, of course, from between, for the research findings and actually getting it into clinical care and practice. But it's great to know that that drug is available for essential tremor already.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Good to know. Staying on the theme of your research, your previous CLEAR funded project was with a Dr. Jim Johnson, and this is going to tie back now into our lifestyle factors for Alzheimer's, risk factors for Alzheimer's. And so I'd really love you to share with our audience the how with Dr. Johnson, you investigated the correlation between Alzheimer's disease and diabetes. So can you tell us more about that research?
Yeah, of course. There's actually a lot of evidence suggesting that there is a link between diabetes, insulin, and Alzheimer's disease. People with diabetes actually have a 30 to 65% higher risk of Alzheimer's disease, of getting Alzheimer's disease. And in fact, the term type 3 diabetes has been coined for Alzheimer's disease and is based on the fact or the theory that Alzheimer's disease may develop in part by insufficient action of insulin in the brain. So, a brain-specific insulin resistance. So, with the work that I've done with Dr. Jim Johnson at UBC, we asked whether the loss of brain-derived insulin specifically, and this is insulin that is made in the brain itself, can be a factor in the progression of Alzheimer's disease. Now, typically, when we think of insulin, you think about insulin released from the pancreas. But Dr. Johnson and my lab showed that insulin can also be produced in the brain itself. And so, what we did is that we tested whether removing only the insulin that was made in the brain could lead to cognitive impairments in a mouse model. And here I should also mention that the Dr. Johnson is also not an Alzheimer's researcher, but rather a diabetes researcher. And only he had the right tools to study this question. And that means only he had the right animal model in which we could delete or remove insulin specifically in the brain.
So what did you find out through this
Yeah,
research?
so absolutely. So interestingly, when we removed insulin made in the brain, the memory performance of female mice was significantly impaired, but the performance of male mice did not seem to be different from the controls itself. And this is incredibly interesting because, of course, Alzheimer's disease presents very differently between males and females. So it seems like females seem to be a little bit more sensitive to this kind of insulin resistance in the brain.
So the causes of Alzheimer's disease and related dementias are complex. I think that's a truth we're understanding here. And this complexity is leading us in new ways in terms of prevention, diagnosis, and treatment. So here's another audience question. What are some of the modifiable lifestyle changes that we can make to prevent the onset of Alzheimer's and related dementia?
Yeah, so there are a number of studies that show that lifestyle changes can reduce the risk or at least delay the onset of Alzheimer's disease. And it's all, the usual suspects. So regular physical exercise, exercise alone has been shown to reduce dementia risk. Exercise improves blood flow, reduces inflammation, increases the secretion of a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which has been shown to have neuroprotective effects in the brain. And exercise can also promote the formation of new neurons in the hippocampus, which is an area of the brain associated with memory. Another thing that is really important for reducing the risk of Alzheimer's disease is improving cardiovascular health. So, what is good for the heart is good for the brain. So, making sure that your blood pressure, cholesterol, sugars are all in check. We, of course, just talked about diabetes and how increased risk of Alzheimer's can be caused by increased blood sugars. And other things include healthy diet, activities that challenge the brain, learn a new skill, read, do puzzles, get better sleep, regular social engagement. All of these are excellent for at least reducing the onset and the risk of Alzheimer's.
Thank you for that. I hope everyone was taking notes, and if you weren't, you'll receive the link and the recording of this afterwards. In the introduction, Dr. Bamji, I mentioned that some statistics on Alzheimer's and dementia, which show that the incidence is rapidly increasing, not just in Canada, but around the globe. Why is this?
Um, Well, the most obvious reason is that the life expectancy is increasing globally. And of course, we know that age is primarily the primary cause of increased number of Alzheimer's
Mm.
disease cases. There's also improved diagnoses and awareness, so more cases are being identified and reported. And then finally, you can point to modern lifestyle factors such as poor diet, lack of physical activity, increased cardiovascular issues like hypertension, obesity, and diabetes. All of these are associated with an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease.
And this is a big question. I'm going to put it to you anyway. We speak of finding a cure for Alzheimer's disease. Is this realistic?
Um, well, we are making advances in diagnosing earlier, and that bodes very well for slowing down the disease. There are also lots of very exciting fundamental research that is being done, generally, immunotherapies, gene editing, personalized medicine. So we really never know where the major breakthrough is going to come from with respect to Alzheimer's disease. Right now, we're making strides in modifying and slowing down the disease, but not really in curing or reversing it. So, if a cure really is right around the corner, it's going to be from some unexpected place. And so, we really have to keep funding high risk, high reward projects.
Which is what CLEAR is all about, if I
Which is
may
what
just say
CLEAR is
that.
all about.
And we'll come back to that in a minute. Because
Absolutely.
on that note, I thought before we end, I just wanted to touch briefly on your role as co-director of the Center for Brain Health.
Mhm.
And there's a reason why. Because what happens, please tell our audience about the center. I've been there, I visited. I didn't know it existed before I held this role. I'm just blown away by what happens there. And I think we should highlight it just for a moment. So could you tell us what happens at the Center for Brain Health at UBC and why is it unique?
Yeah, so the Djavad Mowafaghian Center for Brain Health, as I mentioned earlier, is a hub for both neuroscience research and clinical care in British Columbia. And it's really unique in Canada because it houses 5 brain clinics on the bottom 2 floors. So we have clinics for ALS, mood disorders, and of course, Alzheimer's disease and related dementias, amongst others. And on the top 3 floors, we have research labs. So the idea is that we would bring together researchers like myself and clinicians who actually meet with the patients so that we can really integrate research with clinical care and drive translational research with, to hopefully develop new therapies.
And of course, this speaks to the heart of what CLEAR's mandate, which is funding research which translates into clinical practice. And the fact that it all happens under one roof at the Center for Brain Health is why we're very closely associated with you and so proud to be so. And I just wonder if you wouldn't mind speaking to how organizations like our own, how working with philanthropic partners like CLEAR add to the work of what you do and your research mandates at CBH.
Yeah, so organizations like Clear, really add immense value to our mission. First of all, your organization and other philanthropic organizations tend to be really fearless. You are the ones who are willing to fund high risk, high reward projects that simply would not be funded by government agencies like CIHR or the Center for Center for the sorry so the
Brain.
amount, sorry, the CIHR, I can't, I just completely blanked on what it actually stands for the government agencies. Um, the amount that you guys provide per project is indeed a little bit smaller than the regular government grant, but it is really proved to be critical to get preliminary data that then allows us to go ahead and apply for these larger grants. And without grant dollars from organizations like Clear, there really isn't another mechanism to do this. There simply isn't a replacement for your kind of, philanthropic organization for this type of funding.
We like to think of ourselves as an agitator for getting things done. And if that's the case, and to your trouble with acronyms, I have the same trouble with acronyms all the time. So many in this industry. Well, I have to say this has been a most informative discussion. As a non-scientist myself, I often find the science very difficult to grasp. And speaking with you today has been really helpful, certainly to my understanding. So one thing is clear, if I may use the pun, the only way that we will advance our knowledge of this disease and find better ways to treat it and ways to prevent it altogether is to conduct research. Research is the only way we will change the trajectory of this horrible disease and make a real difference in the lives of patients and families. This has been proven for cancer treatment and in heart and stroke, and it's time to do the same for Alzheimer's disease. So on this note, and to our audience today, I just ask that you would consider supporting critical Alzheimer research by donating to CLEAR Foundation. Thanks to the leadership and generosity of the Hastings family, a multi-generational family impacted by this disease, all donations now, between now and December 31st, will be doubled. So if you would like your donation to have double the impact, please make your donation today. And I know Alicia will be pointing in the direction of a link to follow at the end of our session today. But before we end, I just wanted to thank Dr. Bamji so very much for her time to be with us today. Your insights have been hugely informative and encouraging. And that's where I'd like to end, on a note of hope. To my behind-the-scenes team of one, Alicia, thank you so much for supporting today and making it a success. And to all of you, our audience, thank you for joining us. I look forward to the next time. If you want to listen to this again or share this recording with anyone, please look for an email which will come with the link to the recording. Until we meet again, be safe, be well. And Alicia, please play us out with the public service announcement.
Hey, Al. Beth says hi. Al, my sister, Beth. You just needed a moment. It's okay.
It is projected that 1 million Canadians will be living with some form of dementia in the next 5 years.